Margaret took a slow breath and tried to think clearly. Throughout her entire life, she had always chosen to walk away from conflict. She did not like arguments or confrontation, and she had learned long ago that sometimes it was easier to just let things go. But standing there in that airport with people staring at her and these staff members treating her like she was a thief, something felt different. This was not just about accessing a lounge anymore. This was about being treated with basic respect and dignity as a human being. I am just a person trying to access a service I have paid for. Margaret kept her voice calm and steady. I do not understand why my appearance should matter at all. Craig stepped closer to her, invading her personal space in a way that made her want to step back. Listen, lady, we do not have time for this nonsense. There are real members who need to get through here. Either you leave right now on your own or we will have security escort you out. The choice is yours. Margaret looked at the two staff members and then at the growing crowd around them. She thought about her friend waiting for her in Portland. She thought about all the times in her life when she had chosen peace over standing up for herself. She thought about what her husband always told her about treating people with kindness, regardless of their position or status, and she made a decision. I will wait here while you verify my membership properly. She said it quietly but firmly. I am not doing anything wrong and I will not be intimidated into leaving when I have every right to be here. Kelly's face turned red with anger. Fine, security it is then. She made the call while Craig stood next to Margaret as if guarding a dangerous criminal. Margaret could hear the whispers from the crowd around her. Some people seemed sympathetic while others just looked curious about what would happen next. Within a few minutes, two airport security officers arrived at the scene. The older officer was a man who looked to be in his late 50s with gray hair at his temples and kind eyes. His name tag identified him as Carl Wright. He approached the situation carefully, looking at Kelly and Craig and then at Margaret. What seems to be the problem here? Officer Wright spoke in a professional tone that suggested he wanted to understand the full situation before taking action. Kelly immediately launched into her version of events. This woman is attempting to gain unauthorized access to our premium lounge facilities. She presented a membership card that we believe may be fraudulent. She does not fit the profile of our typical members, and we have reasonable suspicion that the card was either stolen or found. We asked her to leave and she refused, so we called for your assistance. Officer Wright turned to Margaret with a neutral expression. Ma'am, may I see your identification and membership card, please? Margaret handed them over without any argument. Thank you, officer. I have been trying to explain that everything is legitimate, but these staff members refuse to verify it through the proper channels. Wright examined both cards carefully. He looked at the driver's license and then at the membership card. He compared the photo on the license to Margaret's face. Then he looked at the membership card more closely and his eyebrows raised slightly. Mrs. Hayes, this appears to be completely in order. This is a lifetime platinum membership, which is one of the highest tiers available from this airline. That is what I have been trying to tell them. Margaret spoke softly, feeling a small sense of relief that someone was finally listening to her. But Kelly was not ready to back down. Anyone could have that card, officer. She could have stolen it or found it somewhere. Just look at her. Does she really look like someone who belongs in a first-class lounge? Her voice had taken on a desperate edge. Officer Wright's expression changed. His kind eyes became serious as he turned to face Kelly directly. Ms. Morrison, are you refusing service to this passenger based on her physical appearance? I am refusing service based on reasonable suspicion. Kelly's confidence seemed to waver just a little bit, but she held her ground. The card is valid. The identification matches perfectly, and I see no actual evidence of any fraud whatsoever. Wright's voice was firm now. Unless you have a legitimate reason to deny entry, you need to allow Mrs. Hayes to access the lounge. Craig jumped into the conversation, trying to support Kelly. We have the right to refuse service to anyone we find suspicious, officer. It is airport policy. The second security officer, who had been standing quietly, spoke up. She was a younger woman named Lisa Chen. You have the right to refuse service for legitimate business reasons, not for discriminatory ones. What I am witnessing here looks very much like discrimination based on appearance, and that is not acceptable. Margaret wanted nothing more than to disappear. She hated being the center of all this attention. She could see more and more people gathering around with their phones pointed at the scene. But she remained standing there, quietly letting the officers handle the situation, because she knew she had done nothing wrong. Kelly's face had gone from bright red to very pale. She clearly had not expected the security officers to take Margaret's side. Fine. I will call the lounge manager and let them make the final decision on this matter. Her voice shook slightly. You do that. Officer Wright nodded. In the meantime, Mrs. Hayes, you are welcome to wait in the public seating area if you prefer, or you can wait inside the lounge while this gets sorted out properly. I will wait here if that is acceptable. Margaret did not want to cause any more trouble than she felt she had already caused, even though she knew none of this was actually her fault. You have not caused any trouble at all, ma'am. Officer Chen gave her a small, encouraging smile. You have been nothing but patient and polite throughout this entire situation. The trouble here is coming from staff members who made unfair assumptions. Margaret Hayes walked through the busy airport with her old canvas bag hanging from her shoulder. She wore a simple blue cotton dress that she had owned for at least 5 years, and a pair of white sneakers that were comfortable, but clearly worn from use. Her gray hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her face showed the soft lines of a woman who had lived 52 years with kindness in her heart. She had just gotten off a flight from Portland and was traveling by herself for the first time in many months. Her husband was away on business, and she had come to Denver to visit an old friend who was recovering from surgery. The airport seemed busier than she remembered, with people rushing everywhere and loud announcements echoing through the terminal. Margaret walked toward the first-class lounge entrance and began searching through her bag for her membership card. She knew it was somewhere among the receipts and reading glasses and the small notebook she always carried with her. The lounge was a place her husband had introduced her to many years ago, though she rarely traveled alone, so she did not use it very often. She was looking through her bag when a sharp voice interrupted her. A young woman in an airport uniform stood in front of her with her arms crossed. Her name tag said Kelly Morrison, and underneath it said Customer Service Manager. The woman had blonde hair styled perfectly and wore makeup that made her look very put together. She looked at Margaret with an expression that made Margaret suddenly feel embarrassed about her simple clothes. Kelly looked Margaret up and down slowly. Her eyes took in the worn dress and the old sneakers and the canvas bag that had seen better days. Margaret could see the judgment in the woman's face even before she spoke. This lounge is for first-class passengers and premium members only. The general waiting area is back that way. Kelly pointed toward the crowded public seating area without any warmth in her voice. Margaret smiled gently, even though she felt uncomfortable. Oh, I understand. I have my membership card right here somewhere. I am sorry for taking so long to find it. She continued searching through her bag with slightly shaking hands. Kelly's expression became harder. Ma'am, I do not think you understand. This is an exclusive facility. Perhaps you are confused about which lounge you have access to. Her tone suggested that she did not believe Margaret belonged anywhere near the first-class lounge. Margaret finally found her card at the bottom of her bag. It was a sleek black card with platinum lettering that showed lifetime premier status. She held it out with a small smile, hoping this would clear up the confusion. Here it is. I apologize for taking so long to find it. Kelly barely looked at the card before waving her hand dismissively. That could be anyone's card. Do you have identification that matches it? Her voice had become louder, and a few travelers nearby had started to notice the interaction. Of course. Margaret pulled out her driver's license from her wallet and handed it over along with the membership card. She tried to stay calm, even though she could feel her heart beating faster. She had never been good with confrontation, and this situation was making her very uncomfortable. Kelly took both items and examined them slowly. She turned them over several times and held them up to the light as if looking for signs of forgery. By now, a small crowd of travelers had gathered to watch what was happening. Another airport staff member walked over to join Kelly. His name tag read Craig Bennett. What is going on here? Craig looked at Margaret with the same suspicious expression that Kelly wore. This woman is trying to access the lounge with what might be a fraudulent card. Kelly spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. The name matches, but anyone could have stolen this or found it somewhere. Margaret felt her cheeks turn red, but not from anger. She was embarrassed at becoming the center of attention in the busy airport. I assure you that is my card. My husband and I have been members for over 20 years. She spoke quietly, not wanting to make the situation worse. Craig laughed in a way that was not friendly at all. Right, and I am sure your husband is some big important businessman. His voice was filled with sarcasm and disbelief. Actually, he is, Margaret replied, still speaking softly. But that is not really relevant to this situation. The card is valid and I have shown you my proper identification. Kelly pulled out her phone. We get people trying this scam all the time, finding or stealing premium cards and then pretending to be someone they are not. I am going to need you to leave right now before I have security remove you. She began dialing a number on her phone while staring at Margaret with cold eyes. Margaret stood there feeling lost and humiliated. She had lived her whole life trying to be kind to others and avoid making trouble. She had never cared much about money or status, and she certainly had never expected to be treated like a criminal just for trying to use a service she had every right to access. But something inside her said this was not right. She should not have to leave just because these people judged her by her appearance. I am not trying to cause any trouble. Margaret's voice was steady even though her hands continued to shake. If you need to verify my membership, please call the customer service line. They will confirm everything for you. I do not need to call anyone, Kelly snapped at her. I have the authority to refuse entry to anyone I think is suspicious, and you, ma'am, are definitely suspicious. No one who actually belongs in this lounge would show up looking like they just walked out of a thrift store. The crowd around them had grown larger. Several people had pulled out their phones, and Margaret could see they were recording what was happening. She noticed this but tried not to react. She just wanted this whole situation to end, but she also knew she had done nothing wrong. Stephen listened to his wife without interrupting her once. His expression grew progressively darker as she spoke. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and Margaret could see the anger building in him. But he remained silent until she finished her account. When she was done, he took a slow breath before turning back to Gregory Holmes and the other officials. My wife is one of the kindest and most humble people I have ever known. Stephen's voice was controlled, but everyone could hear the fury beneath it. She does not care about wealth or status or impressing anyone. She wears simple clothes because she is comfortable in them, not because she cannot afford better. She drives a 10-year-old car because it runs well and she sees no reason to replace it. She was traveling alone today to help a friend in need, which is exactly the type of person she is. She gives her time and her energy to people who need help without ever asking for anything in return. He paused and looked directly at Kelly and Craig. And, because of her appearance, your staff assumed she was a criminal. They refused to do the basic task of verifying her credentials properly. They threatened her with security and arrest. They subjected her to public humiliation in front of dozens of strangers. Is that an accurate summary of what happened here? Yes, sir. Gregory's voice was barely above a whisper, and I cannot express how deeply sorry we are. This behavior is completely unacceptable and goes against everything our airport stands for. We will be taking immediate and serious disciplinary action. Stephen looked at Kelly and Craig, who both seemed to wish they could vanish into thin air. I build technology that helps millions of people travel safely around the world every single day. Hayes Global Industries has partnerships with every major airline. We have contracts with airports on 6 continents. We provide the navigation systems and safety equipment that keeps passengers safe. Do you have any idea what position you have put this airport in? Craig opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. He seemed to realize that anything he said would only make things worse for him. Stephen turned his attention back to the management team. I do not want apologies directed at me. They need to go to my wife. But more importantly, this incident reveals a fundamental problem with how your staff views and treats passengers. Judging people by their appearance and making assumptions about their worth or their honesty, based on how they dress or how they look, is not just poor customer service. It is discriminatory, and depending on how it is applied, it could be illegal. Margaret gently touched her husband's arm. Stephen, I appreciate you standing up for me. I really do. But I do not want anyone to lose their jobs over this. Everyone makes mistakes and deserves a chance to learn from them. Stephen looked at his wife with a mixture of deep love and exasperation. You are far more forgiving than these people deserve, Margaret. He turned back to Gregory. Here is what is going to happen. Kelly Morrison and Craig Bennett will undergo mandatory retraining, comprehensive training on discrimination and customer service and professional conduct. They will be suspended without pay for 2 weeks starting immediately. And if there is ever another incident involving either of them making judgments based on appearance or treating passengers with disrespect, they will be terminated on the spot. No second chances. Understood, sir, Gregory said quickly. We will implement that immediately. Furthermore, Stephen was not finished. I want a comprehensive review of all training protocols for every single customer-facing staff member at this airport. There is clearly a culture problem here that needs to be addressed from the ground up. I will be making a formal complaint to the Airport Authority Board, and I expect regular detailed updates on the changes being implemented to prevent this from happening again." He glanced at the phone still being held by some of the passengers who had witnessed the original confrontation. "I am sure this incident will be all over social media within the next few hours if it is not already. How you handle the situation from this point forward will determine whether this becomes a story about one terrible interaction or whether it becomes a story about systemic failure of leadership and oversight." Officer Wright, who had remained nearby throughout the entire confrontation, stepped forward. "Mr. Hayes, if I may say something, your wife handled this situation with remarkable grace and dignity. She never raised her voice once. She never made threats or demands. She just stood her ground politely and firmly and asked to be treated fairly like any human being deserves." Stephen's expression softened slightly as he looked at Margaret again. "That is exactly who she is, officer, which makes what happened here even more inexcusable. These staff members saw a woman in simple clothes and immediately assumed the worst about her. They did not see her character or her kindness or her dignity. They only saw someone they thought they could bully and dismiss." Kelly finally found her voice, though it came out shaky and filled with tears. "Mrs. Hayes, I am so incredibly sorry. I was completely and totally wrong. There is no excuse for how I treated you. I let my own prejudices and assumptions cloud my judgment, and I failed to treat you with the basic respect that every person deserves." Margaret looked at the young woman for a long moment. She could see that Kelly was genuinely upset and possibly genuinely sorry, though it was hard to tell if the remorse came from understanding her mistake or from fear of the consequences. "I accept your apology, Kelly. I truly hope you will learn from this experience. Every single person who walks through that door deserves to be treated with basic courtesy and respect regardless of what they are wearing or what they look like or how much money you think they have." Craig also offered an apology, though his seemed less heartfelt and more motivated by the fear of what might happen to him. "I am sorry, Mrs. Hayes, I should not have treated you that way." Margaret simply nodded at him. She could tell the difference between genuine remorse and words spoken out of self-preservation. While Kelly stepped away to make her phone call, several travelers from the crowd approached Margaret. An elderly gentleman with white hair and glasses came over first and handed her an unopened bottle of water. "You handled that with remarkable grace, my dear. I am sorry you had to deal with such rudeness, thank you." Margaret accepted the water gratefully. She was surprised by the kindness from these strangers. A young mother carrying a baby and holding the hand of a small child stopped next to her. "I just want to apologize on behalf of the airport. What those staff members did was completely wrong, and you did not deserve to be treated that way." Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I appreciate your kind words." She was not used to this much attention, and she did not quite know how to handle all the support. Craig stood several feet away with his arms crossed, looking more and more uncomfortable. More travelers were openly criticizing the way Margaret had been treated, and some were even calling for complaints to be filed against the staff members. He pulled out his phone and started texting someone frantically. His confidence from earlier had completely disappeared. Officer Wright stayed near Margaret, making sure she felt safe. He had seen many situations like this in his years working airport security. People with power often abused it when they thought they could get away with it. But something about this quiet woman in her simple dress had touched him. She had stood her ground without being aggressive or angry. She had simply asked to be treated fairly. After what felt like a very long time, Kelly returned from her phone call. Her face was stiff and hard to read. "The lounge manager is reviewing the situation right now. But in the meantime, I have been instructed to allow you to wait inside the lounge." Her voice was tight, and she clearly did not want to say these words, "Thank you." Margaret gathered her canvas bag and prepared to follow Kelly inside. But Kelly could not resist one final attempt to assert her authority. "I want to be very clear about something. We are going to be keeping a close eye on you. If there is any indication whatsoever of fraud or deception, you will be removed immediately and you may face criminal charges. Do you understand?" Officer Wright stepped forward quickly. "Ms. Morrison, I strongly suggest you stop making unfounded accusations right now. You are already on very thin ice here, and continuing to harass this passenger could result in serious consequences for you." Kelly pressed her lips together in a thin line. She said nothing more, but her eyes showed her anger. She gestured sharply for Margaret to follow her and turned toward the lounge entrance. The lounge was beautiful and quiet. It was such a contrast to the chaos and noise of the main terminal. There were comfortable leather chairs arranged in small groups. Soft lighting created a warm and relaxing atmosphere. A refreshment area along one wall offered coffee and tea and various snacks. Several travelers sat in different areas reading newspapers or working on their laptops. A few looked up when Margaret entered with Kelly. Some showed curiosity on their faces, while others simply returned to what they were doing. Kelly pointed to a chair in the far corner of the lounge away from the other guests. "You can wait there." Her tone was still cold and unfriendly. Margaret walked to the indicated chair and sat down. She placed her bag on the floor beside her and took a deep breath. The ordeal was not completely over, but at least she could sit and rest now. She pulled out her phone and saw several missed calls and text messages from her husband, Stephen. He must have been trying to reach her while she was on the airplane. She thought about calling him back right away, but decided to wait a few minutes. She wanted to calm down and compose herself first. A lounge attendant approached her with a genuine smile on her face. The woman looked to be in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her name tag said Patricia. "Can I get you anything, Mrs. Hayes? Perhaps some coffee or tea? Maybe something to eat." The fact that this woman used her actual name and spoke to her with real courtesy and kindness nearly brought tears to Margaret's eyes again. "A cup of tea would be wonderful." "Thank you so much, of course. I will bring that right out for you." Patricia smiled warmly and walked toward the refreshment area. Margaret sat back in the comfortable chair and tried to relax. Her hands had finally stopped shaking and her heartbeat was returning to normal. She looked around the lounge and noticed Kelly and Craig standing near the entrance. They were speaking to each other in urgent whispers and both kept looking at their phones. They seemed worried about something, but Margaret tried not to pay attention to them. Patricia returned with a cup of hot tea and a small plate of cookies. "Here you are. Please let me know if you need anything else at all." "This is perfect. Thank you for being so kind." Margaret wrapped her hands around the warm cup and felt some of the tension leave her body. She opened the reading app on her tablet and tried to focus on her book. It was a mystery novel that her friend had recommended, but she found it hard to concentrate. Her mind kept replaying the events that had just happened. She had never been treated that way before. Sure, she had experienced moments of rudeness or dismissiveness in her life, but nothing quite like this. The accusation of theft, the public humiliation, the threat of arrest. It all felt surreal. Margaret thought about her husband, Stephen, and what he would say when she told him about this. He would probably be furious. He had worked his entire life to build his company and his success, but he had never let wealth or power change who he was at his core. He treated everyone with respect, from the janitors in his office building to the world leaders he met with regularly. And he had taught Margaret that a person's worth had nothing to do with their bank account or their job title or the clothes they wore. Patricia came by their table one more time. "Is there anything else I can get for you both?" she asked with genuine warmth in her voice. "No, thank you, Patricia." Margaret smiled at her. "You have been wonderfully kind and I appreciate it so much." "It is my pleasure, Mrs. Hayes." Patricia hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "If I may say something, I want you to know that not everyone who works here shares the attitudes that Kelly and Craig displayed. Most of us believe in treating every single person with respect and dignity, regardless of anything else." "Thank you for saying that." Margaret reached out and gently touched Patricia's hand. "I know that good people work here. Today was just an unfortunate situation with a couple of individuals who made poor choices." After Patricia left, Stephen checked his phone. His assistant had sent him several messages about the incident. Apparently, news was spreading quickly through social media and business circles. Several news outlets had already reached out requesting comments. The videos of the confrontation had been viewed millions of times, and people were expressing strong opinions about what had happened. This is becoming a major story. Stephen showed Margaret his phone. "People are calling for boycotts of the airport and the airline. They are demanding that Kelly and Craig be fired immediately." Margaret looked troubled. "I do not want that, Stephen. I do not want people to lose their jobs. I just wanted to be treated with basic respect. I know you do not want that." Stephen put his phone away. "But you need to understand that what happened to you represents a larger problem that many people face every day. Those who cannot afford expensive clothes or who do not fit certain stereotypes are often dismissed or mistreated." People are responding so strongly because they have experienced similar situations themselves or they recognize the injustice of it. Margaret understood what he was saying, but it still made her uncomfortable. She had never wanted to be at the center of a controversy or to be responsible for anyone losing their livelihood. She just wanted people to treat each other better. What we witnessed today was not just about you, and it was not just about this airport, Stephen continued. It was about a fundamental failure to recognize human dignity. Those staff members saw your worn dress and your old sneakers, and they made a judgment about your character and your worth. They did not see you as a person. They saw you as someone beneath them who did not deserve courtesy or fair treatment. You are right, Margaret acknowledged. And I suppose if my experience can help other people avoid similar treatment, then maybe something good can come from it. They sat together watching the activity in the lounge. Business travelers typed away on their laptops. Families with children gathered around tables sharing snacks. A young couple held hands and talked quietly in a corner. All of these people were just trying to get somewhere. They all had their own stories and struggles and dreams, and every single one of them deserved to be treated with kindness and respect. Do you remember when we first met? Margaret asked suddenly. Stephen smiled at the memory. Of course I do. I was a struggling engineer working 18-hour days trying to get my first patent approved. You were working at that little bookstore near my apartment. You came in every Saturday morning. Margaret's eyes grew distant with the memory. Always so polite and kind even though you looked exhausted. You would buy a coffee and browse the engineering section for hours. You never acted like you were too important or too busy to say hello or to chat about books. I fell in love with you the third time I came into that store, Stephen said. You recommended a book about innovative problem solving, and when I tried to pay you, refused to let me. You said that knowledge should be shared freely and that you could tell I was working on something important. I believed in you even then. Margaret squeezed his hand. I could see that you were different from other people. You cared about making things better and helping people, not just about making money. Stephen had built his company on those principles. He had created technologies that made air travel safer and more efficient and more environmentally friendly. He had always believed that business success should come from creating real value for people, not from exploiting them or cutting corners. And he had never forgotten where he came from or the struggles he had faced when he was starting out. That is why what happened today made me so angry. Stephen said. Those staff members forgot that every person has a story. They forgot that wealth and status are temporary and superficial. They forgot the basic lesson that we should treat others the way we want to be treated. It is easy to forget those things when society constantly reinforces the opposite message, Margaret said. We are bombarded every day with images and messages telling us that success means expensive things, and that our worth is tied to our possessions. It takes real strength of character to resist those messages. You have that strength, Stephen told her. You always have. Even when I started becoming successful and we could afford anything you wanted, you never changed. You stayed true to yourself and your values. Margaret thought about this. It was true that their lives had changed dramatically over the years. Stephen's company had grown beyond anything they had imagined when they first got married. They had homes in multiple cities and more money than they could ever spend. But Margaret had made a conscious choice not to let wealth define her. She still shopped at regular stores and drove a practical car. She volunteered at local charities and spent time with old friends who had nothing to do with business or society circles. Money is just a tool, Margaret said. It can do wonderful things when used properly, but it does not make anyone better or more valuable as a human being. The person who works at a grocery store has just as much worth and dignity as a billionaire CEO. We are all just people trying to live our lives as best we can. Gregory Holmes returned to the lounge about 30 minutes after he had left. He looked nervous but determined as he approached Stephen and Margaret. He carried a folder in his hands. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, he began. I wanted to update you personally on the actions we are taking. We have formally suspended Kelly Morrison and Craig Bennett without pay for 2 weeks as you requested. They will be required to complete comprehensive training programs before they can return to work. We have also initiated a full review of our customer service protocols and training materials. He opened the folder and showed them a detailed plan. We will be implementing new procedures, including mandatory bias training for all staff. We are creating a clear system for passengers to report discriminatory treatment, and we are establishing regular audits to ensure our staff members are treating all passengers with equal respect, regardless of their appearance. That sounds like a good start. Stephen reviewed the documents. I want monthly reports on the implementation of these changes sent directly to my office. Of course, sir. Gregory agreed immediately. And Mrs. Hayes, I want to personally apologize again for what you experienced today. It was unacceptable, and I take full responsibility as the lounge manager for not ensuring my staff were properly trained and supervised. I appreciate your apology, Margaret said. I hope these changes will prevent other people from having similar experiences. After Gregory left, Margaret stood up and gathered her things. I think I am ready to go now. Let us catch that flight to Portland and go see my friend. Stephen stood as well and took her bag from her. They walked together through the lounge and out into the main terminal. People recognized them as they passed. Some whispered to their companions. Others smiled supportively. A few even offered words of encouragement to Margaret. As they made their way toward their gate, Margaret reflected on everything that had happened. It had been an awful experience in many ways. Being accused of fraud and threatened with arrest had been humiliating and frightening. But something good had come from it. Changes were being made that might help countless other travelers in the future. You know what I realized today, Margaret said as they walked. I have spent most of my life avoiding conflict and trying not to make waves. I always thought that keeping the peace was the most important thing. But sometimes staying silent in the face of injustice just allows that injustice to continue. Stephen looked at her with pride. You found your voice today, Margaret. And when you spoke, people listened. They reached their gate and settled into seats to wait for their flight. Margaret pulled out her phone and sent a text to her friend letting her know they would be arriving soon. She felt tired from the emotional stress of the day, but she also felt something else. She felt empowered. She had stood up for herself and for others, and she had made a difference. The story of what happened at the airport continued to spread. News outlets picked it up and it became a trending topic on social media. People shared their own stories of being judged or mistreated based on their appearance. The conversation expanded to broader issues of discrimination and bias in customer service and society in general. Hayes Global Industries received thousands of messages of support. Many people praised Stephen for standing up for his wife, but even more praised Margaret for her grace and dignity under pressure. She became an unexpected symbol of quiet resistance against superficial judgments and discrimination. Several weeks later, Kelly Morrison reached out to Margaret through the airport management. She asked if she could meet with Margaret in person to apologize properly. Margaret agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near the airport. Kelly arrived looking nervous and humble. She had clearly been through a difficult time. Mrs. Hayes, thank you for agreeing to see me. I know I do not deserve your time or your forgiveness. Everyone deserves a chance to make amends. Margaret said kindly. Please sit down. Kelly sat across from her with tears in her eyes. I have spent every day since that incident thinking about what I did and why I did it. I have been in therapy trying to understand my own biases and prejudices. The training program the airport required me to take opened my eyes to how wrong my thinking was. She took a shaky breath before continuing. I grew up in a household where appearance and status mattered more than anything else. My parents constantly judged people by their clothes and their cars and their jobs. I absorbed those values without even realizing it. When I saw you that day, I made instant judgments based on conditioning I did not even know I had. Margaret listened without interrupting, letting Kelly speak. The worst part is that I pride myself on being a good person. Kelly wiped her eyes. I volunteer. I donate to charity. I thought I was open-minded and fair. But when it came down to it, I treated you horribly because of something as meaningless as the clothes you were wearing. I am so ashamed of myself. Awareness is the first step toward change, Margaret said gently. The fact that you are doing this work on yourself shows real character. Most people would just make excuses or blame others. I want to be better, Kelly said earnestly. I want to treat every person I encounter with respect and kindness regardless of anything else about them. Your example that day showed me what real dignity looks like. You could have been angry or vindictive, but instead you remained calm and graceful. That has stayed with me. Margaret reached across the table and took Kelly's hand. We all have biases and prejudices, Kelly. The important thing is to recognize them and work to overcome them. You are doing that now, and I am proud of you for it. They talked for over an hour. Kelly shared more about her journey of self-discovery and the changes she was making in her life. Margaret offered encouragement and wisdom. By the end of their conversation, both women felt lighter. As Margaret drove home that evening, she thought about the unexpected journey that had started with a simple trip to the airport. She had learned that standing up for yourself was not selfish or wrong. She had learned that her voice mattered, and that speaking out against injustice could create real change. And she had learned that even the most difficult experiences could lead to growth and understanding, if approached with an open heart. Stephen was waiting for her when she got home. "How did it go with Kelly?" he asked. "It went well." Margaret smiled. "I think she genuinely wants to change and become better. People deserve second chances when they are willing to do the hard work of examining themselves and growing. That is very generous of you." Stephen pulled her into a hug. "Most people would not be so forgiving. Holding on to anger and resentment only hurts us," Margaret said. "Forgiveness and compassion heal everyone involved." That night as they sat together, Margaret felt grateful for everything that had happened. Not for the experience itself, which had been painful, but for what it had taught her and for the changes it had sparked. She had found strength she did not know she possessed. She had inspired others to examine their own biases, and she had shown that quiet dignity and grace could be more powerful than anger or retaliation. The lesson was simple, but profound. Every person, regardless of their appearance or status or wealth, deserves to be treated with basic human respect and kindness. That truth applied to everyone, from the wealthiest executive to the person struggling to make ends meet. We are all human beings with hopes and fears and dreams, and when we remember that fundamental truth, we create a better world for everyone. Stephen placed his arm protectively around Margaret's shoulders. "Are you ready to leave now? We can catch the next flight to Portland together and spend the weekend helping your friend." "Actually," Margaret said with a small smile, "I would like to sit here and finish my tea first, if that is all right with you. Patricia brought me a lovely cup of tea, and it would be a shame to waste it. And these cookies are really quite good." For the first time since arriving at the lounge, Stephen laughed. It was a genuine laugh that broke some of the tension in the room. "Of course, Margaret. Whatever you want. We can sit here as long as you like." The airport officials began to disperse. Gregory Holmes promised to follow up personally on every single commitment that Stephen had outlined. He assured them both that a full report would be prepared and submitted to the airport authority within 48 hours. Kelly and Craig were escorted away by human resources staff who had been called to the scene. Both of them looked devastated as they left the lounge. The other guests in the lounge who had witnessed the confrontation gradually returned to their own activities. However, several of them approached Margaret before settling back into their seats. They wanted to express their support and to tell her how impressed they were with the way she had handled herself. An older businessman shook Stephen's hand. "Your wife is a remarkable woman, Mr. Hayes. We need more people like her in this world." "Thank you," Stephen replied. "I agree completely." A young woman who had been one of the people recording the incident came over. "I posted the video online and it has already been shared thousands of times. People are outraged by what happened. I hope that helps bring about real change." Margaret felt uncomfortable with the attention, but she thanked the woman for her support. She hoped that something good might come from this awful experience. Officer Wright and Officer Chen stopped by before leaving. "Mrs. Hayes, it was an honor to meet you," Wright said sincerely. "I have dealt with a lot of difficult situations in my career, but I have rarely seen someone handle injustice with such grace." "Thank you, officer." Margaret shook both of their hands. "And thank you for believing me and treating me fairly when others did not." After the officers left, Stephen and Margaret sat together in the quiet corner of the lounge. He still had his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned against him, feeling safe and protected. Patricia came by to refill Margaret's tea and brought fresh cookies for both of them. "Can I ask you something?" Stephen said quietly. "Why did you not just leave when they first confronted you? You could have avoided all of this." Margaret thought about the question carefully before answering. "I thought about leaving. You know, I hate confrontation, and I almost walked away like I have done so many times before in my life. But something stopped me this time. I realized that if I left without standing up for myself, I would be accepting their judgment. I would be agreeing that people like Kelly and Craig have the right to treat others as less than human, based on appearance alone." She took a sip of her tea before continuing. "I kept thinking about all the other people who might be treated the same way. People who do not have the resources or the confidence to stand up for themselves. If I just walked away, then nothing would change. Kelly and Craig would continue to judge people by their clothes and their belongings. They would continue to make assumptions about worth and character based on superficial things. Stephen looked at his wife with profound admiration. You stood up for yourself and for everyone else who might face the same treatment in the future. That takes real courage, Margaret. I do not feel very courageous, Margaret admitted. I was scared the whole time. My hands were shaking and my heart was pounding, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Real courage is not the absence of fear, Stephen said. It is doing what is right even when you are afraid. You demonstrated more character in that situation than most people show in a lifetime. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, just being together. Margaret finished her tea and ate another cookie. The lounge had returned to its normal, peaceful atmosphere. Other travelers worked on their laptops or read their newspapers. The soft classical music playing in the background was soothing. You know what the saddest part of this whole thing is, Margaret said thoughtfully. Kelly and Craig are not bad people. They have just been taught to judge others by the wrong criteria. We live in a world that tells us constantly that appearance matters more than character, that wealth equals worth, that designer clothes and expensive accessories are markers of value as a human being. Stephen nodded. You are right. This is a symptom of a much larger problem in our society. I hope they really do learn from this experience, Margaret said. I hope they start to see people differently, not based on what they wear or drive or how much money they appear to have, but based on how they treat others and the content of their character. If anyone can inspire that kind of change, it is you. Stephen squeezed her hand gently. You have always seen the best in people even when they do not deserve it. Margaret smiled. I try to remember that everyone is fighting their own battles. Kelly might have her own insecurities or pressures that led her to behave that way. It does not excuse what she did, but it helps me understand it. You are too kind, Margaret. Most people in your position would want revenge or harsh punishment. What good would that do? Margaret asked. Destroying someone's career might feel satisfying in the moment, but it does not actually solve anything. Real change comes from education and understanding, not from punishment alone. Stephen looked at his wife and felt overwhelmed with love for her. He had built a massive company and accumulated enormous wealth. He had negotiated with presidents and prime ministers. He had made decisions that affected thousands of lives. But sitting here with Margaret, he was reminded that none of those accomplishments mattered as much as the simple wisdom she possessed. Margaret had been sitting quietly in the corner of the lounge for about 20 minutes. She sipped her tea slowly and tried to focus on the words in her book, but her mind kept wandering. The tea was excellent and the cookies were delicious, but she could not fully relax. She kept sensing tension in the air around her. She noticed that the atmosphere in the lounge had shifted somehow. Kelly and Craig were still near the entrance, but now they were joined by several other people in airport uniforms. They were all looking at their phones and talking in voices that were too low for Margaret to hear. But she could see the expressions on their faces. They looked worried. Some looked almost panicked. Then the lounge manager appeared. He was a well-dressed man who looked to be in his early 40s, wearing a dark suit and tie. His name tag identified him as Gregory Holmes. He was followed by several other officials, including someone whose badge said, Airport General Manager. All of them wore expressions that ranged from serious concern to barely controlled panic. Margaret looked up from her tablet, confused by the sudden commotion. She watched as Gregory scanned the lounge with his eyes moving from person to person until they landed on her. When he saw her, his whole body seemed to tense up. He straightened his tie and walked across the lounge toward her with quick, purposeful steps. Mrs. Hayes. His voice was tight with stress. I want to apologize profusely for the treatment you received today. There has been a terrible and completely unacceptable misunderstanding. I assure you we are taking immediate action to address this situation. Margaret started to respond, but before she could speak, the lounge doors opened again. The energy in the entire room changed instantly. Several men in dark suits entered first. They were clearly professional security personnel. Their eyes scanned the room carefully, and they positioned themselves at strategic points. Then another man walked through the door. Stephen Hayes entered the lounge, and his presence commanded immediate attention from everyone there. He was a tall man, standing well over 6 feet with broad shoulders that filled out his perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. At 58 years old, his hair had turned silver, but it only added to his distinguished appearance. His face showed strong features and his blue eyes were sharp and intelligent. Those eyes were usually warm and kind, especially when he looked at his wife. But right now they were cold and hard as steel as he surveyed the scene before him. Stephen Hayes was the founder and chief executive officer of Hayes Global Industries. He had started with a small engineering firm 30 years ago and built it into one of the largest aerospace and technology companies in the entire world. His innovations in sustainable aviation technology had changed the industry completely. His company was worth over $80 billion and employed more than 100,000 people across 6 continents. His name carried enormous weight in boardrooms and government offices around the world. When Stephen Hayes spoke, people listened. Margaret stood up from her chair, surprised to see him. "Stephen, what are you doing here? I thought you were in Seattle for meetings all weekend." Stephen's expression softened immediately when he looked at his wife. He crossed the lounge in quick strides and took both of her hands in his. "I finished the meetings early and caught a flight so I could surprise you. I wanted us to spend the weekend together." He studied her face carefully with concern in his eyes. "Are you all right? I received several urgent calls from airport security and management about some kind of incident involving you." "I am fine." Margaret squeezed his hands gently. "It was just a misunderstanding about my lounge access. Nothing for you to worry about." Stephen's jaw tightened visibly. He turned slowly to face the assembled group of airport officials. Gregory Holmes looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. The airport general manager had gone pale. Kelly and Craig stood against the far wall looking terrified. "Someone needs to explain to me exactly what happened here." Stephen's voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. When he spoke in that tone, people knew he expected immediate and honest answers. Gregory Holmes cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Hayes, sir, there was an unfortunate incident with our customer service staff. Your wife was questioned about the validity of her membership card and was treated with what I must admit was a significant lack of respect and professionalism." Questioned. Stephen's tone could have frozen fire. "I have seen the videos. Multiple travelers recorded the entire incident and several of them sent copies to my office. My wife was accused of fraud. She was threatened with arrest. She was humiliated in front of dozens of people. And why? Because 2 of your staff members decided that she did not look wealthy enough to belong in a first-class lounge." Kelly Morrison had turned completely white. She stood pressed against the wall as if trying to disappear into it. Her hands were shaking and she looked like she might be sick. "That is not exactly what happened, sir." Craig started to protest, but Stephen cut him off with a single look. The young man's mouth snapped shut and he said nothing more. "I have watched the recordings," Stephen continued, speaking in that same quiet, dangerous voice. 3 different angles, multiple videos. I know exactly what happened here, and I know exactly what was said." He turned his attention back to Margaret. "Tell me in your own words what occurred. I want to hear it from you." Margaret recounted the events calmly, just as they had happened. She did not exaggerate anything or add drama to the story. She simply stated the facts in her usual gentle way. She told him about searching for her card and about Kelly's initial dismissal. She explained how they had refused to properly verify her credentials and how they had accused her of theft. She described being threatened with security and the humiliation of having everyone stare at her.